Welcome to Quiz Time. I'm your quiz master, Sean, and I've got 100 questions for you about the 1960s. So let's have a little fun. Let's test our memories and keep our brains young, shall we? Let's start with question number 1. Which TV show debuted in 1966 and featured characters exploring space aboard the Starship Enterprise? Was it Lost in Space, Star Trek, or The Twilight Zone? That was Star Trek. In what year did the Beatles release their groundbreaking album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band? 1967, 1965, or 1966? The year was 1967. What popular children's toy was introduced by Wham-O in 1961? Was it the Frisbee? Was it the hula hoop? Or was it the slip and slide? It was the slip and slide. True or false? Catch-22, published in 1960, addresses themes of racial injustice and moral growth. Is that true? Or is it false? And that is false. We'd be talking about To Kill a Mockingbird. What significant event happened on July 20th, 1969? The Apollo 2 moon landing, the Woodstock Festival, or the Cuban Missile Crisis? July 20th, 1969. That was the Apollo 2 moon landing. Which famous band was known as the Fab Four? Was that the Beatles? Was it the Rolling Stones? Or was it the Monkees? Hey, we're the Beatles. What fashion trend associated with the 1960s was popularized by British model Twiggy? Hippie, mod, or punk? Oh, Twiggy popularized mod. Who was the first woman in space, orbiting the Earth in 1963? Mae Jemison, Sally Ride, or Valentina Tereshkova? And that astronaut was Valentina Tereshkova. In which year was the Berlin Wall constructed? 1960, 1961, or 1962? The Berlin Wall was constructed in 1961. Which animated TV series featuring a Stone Age family premiered in 1960? And that Stone Age family was the Flintstones. Who wrote the novel Catch-22, published in 1961? And that was written by Joseph Heller. What iconic car was first introduced by Ford in 1964? Was it the Camaro? Was it the Corvette? Or was it the Mustang? The iconic car was the Mustang. Which city hosted the Summer Olympics in 1964? Was it Mexico City? Was it Tokyo? Or was it Rome? In 1964, the Summer Olympics were hosted by Tokyo. What was the name of the spacecraft that carried Yuri Gagarin into space in 1961? Vostok 1, Sputnik 1, or Luna 2? Yuri Gagarin rode the Vostok 1 in 1961. Which actress starred as Holly Golightly in the 1961 film Breakfast at Tiffany's? Audrey Hepburn, Marilyn Monroe, or Elizabeth Taylor? And that star was Audrey Hepburn. What significant environmental book did Rachel Carson publish in 1962? The Closing Circle, The Population Bomb, or Silent Spring? She published Silent Spring. Which was the highest grossing film of the 1960s? Was it Mary Poppins? Was it The Sound of Music? Or was it Dr. Zhivago? And that was The Sound of Music. Who directed the 1960 film Psycho? Was it Alfred Hitchcock? Was it Orson Welles? Or was it Stanley Kubrick? And Psycho was directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Which famous music festival was held in Monterey, California in 1967? And that famous music festival was the Monterey Pop Festival. Which Beatles album was the last one they recorded together as a band? Revolver, Let It Be, or Abbey Road? The last one they recorded together was Abbey Road. Which American author wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, published in 1962? Was it J.D. Salinger, Ken Kesey, or Jack Kerouac? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That was by Ken Kesey. Which 1960s TV show featured a single father raising 3 boys? And that TV show was My 3 Sons. What car model did Chevrolet introduce in 1967? Was it the Camaro, the Impala, or the Charger? Chevrolet introduced the Camaro in 1967. In what year did Marilyn Monroe pass away? Was it 1962, 1960, or 1964? Marilyn Monroe passed away in 1962. Who was the founder of Motown Records, established in 1960? Was it Diana Ross? Was it Smokey Robinson? Or was it Berry Gordy? The founder of Motown Records was Berry Gordy. Which event occurred first, the launch of Vostok 1 or the Cuban Missile Crisis? And that would be the launch of Vostok 1. Who was the first African American to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964? Was it Martin Luther King Jr.? Was it Ralph Bunche? Or was it James Sumner? The first African American to win the Nobel Peace Prize was Martin Luther King Jr. Which animated television special first aired in 1965 and became an annual holiday tradition? Frosty the Snowman, A Charlie Brown Christmas, or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? It was A Charlie Brown Christmas. What album did Bob Dylan release in 1965, which included the hit Like a Rolling Stone? Blonde on Blonde, Bring It All Back Home, or Highway 61 Revisited? That was Highway 61 Revisited. What iconic British car was introduced in 1959 and became popular in the 1960s? And that iconic British car was the Mini Cooper. Who won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1962 for her role in The Miracle Worker? Anne Bancroft, Elizabeth Taylor, or Audrey Hepburn? And the award goes to Anne Bancroft. Which influential rock band was formed in London in 1962? The Kinks, the Rolling Stones, or The Who? And that influential rock band was the Rolling Stones. What year was the first Super Bowl played? 1967, 1969, or 1965? Super Bowl I was played in 1967. Who wrote the play Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which premiered in 1962? Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, or Edward Albee? And that was written by Edward Albee. Which Beatles song became the title track of their first feature film, released in 1964? Yellow Submarine, Help, or A Hard Day's Night? And that song was A Hard Day's Night. Who was the voice behind the hit song Stand By Me, released in 1961? Was that voice Ben E. King, Sam Cooke, or was it Otis Redding? The voice behind Stand By Me was Ben E. King. In what year did the television show Bewitched first air? 1964, 1965, or 1963? Bewitched first aired in 1964. Which famous artist created the Campbell Soup Cans artwork in 1962? Was it Jackson Pollock, Roy Lichtenstein, or Andy Warhol? And that was Andy Warhol. Who was the first person to conduct a spacewalk in 1965? Was it Neil Armstrong? Was it Alexei Leonov? Or was it Buzz Aldrin? The first person to conduct a spacewalk was Alexei Leonov. What famous landmark opened in Seattle in 1962? Was it the Gateway Arch? Was it the Space Needle? Or was it the CN Tower? That would be the Space Needle. In what year did the original Doctor Who TV series first air? 1965, 1964, or 1963? Doctor Who first aired in 1963. Which television show featured a group of castaways stranded on a deserted island, first airing in 1964? And that would be Gilligan's Island. What year was the first James Bond film, Dr. No, released? 1962, 1961, or 1960? The first James Bond film was released in 1962. Which literary figure wrote Fahrenheit 451, published in 1953, but gained significant popularity in the 1960s? And that was Roy Bradbury. Who was the lead singer of the Supremes, one of Motown's most successful acts in the 1960s? Was it Diana Ross, Martha Reeves, or Gladys Knight? And that was Diana Ross. What was the first James Bond film to star Sean Connery? The first Bond film to star Sean Connery was Dr. No. Which American actress starred in the 1961 movie The Misfits? Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, or Audrey Hepburn? And that was starring Marilyn Monroe. In what year did the popular sitcom The Andy Griffith Show first air? 1960, 1962, or 1964? And the year was 1960. Which was the best-selling Beatles single of the 1960s in the UK? Hey Jude, I Want to Hold Your Hand, or She Loves You? The best-selling single in the UK in the 60s was She Loves You. What 1960s TV show featured a talking horse? And that would be Mr. Ed. Of course, of course, of course. Which band was originally called the Warlocks? The Byrds, the Doors, or the Grateful Dead? The Warlocks became the Grateful Dead. What was the first name of Captain Kirk, a character in Star Trek? Was it James Kirk, John Kirk, or Joseph Kirk? Captain Kirk's first name was James. Which 1960s TV show starred Don Adams as a bumbling secret agent? Mission Impossible, Get Smart, or I Spy? And that was Get Smart. Who was the lead singer of the Rolling Stones during the 1960s? The lead singer of the Stones is Mick Jagger, also lead singer in the 2020s. What 1966 album by the Beach Boys is considered one of the greatest of all time? Surf's Up, Smile, or Pet Sounds? The greatest of all time, Pet Sounds. Which TV show featured the characters Barnabas Collins and Angelique Bouchard? The Munsters, Dark Shadows, or Bewitched? And the show was Dark Shadows. What was the name of the Beatles manager who passed away in 1967? George Martin, Brian Wilson, or Brian Epstein? The Beatles manager was Brian Epstein. Which novel by Philip K. Dick was published in 1962? Ubik, The Man in the High Castle, or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Philip K. Dick produced The Man in the High Castle. Who starred as Maria in the 1965 film The Sound of Music? The star of The Sound of Music? Well, that would be Julie Andrews. Name the spacecraft that landed the first humans on the moon. Was it the Endeavour? Was it the Eagle? Or was it Columbia? And that was Eagle. Who wrote the 1963 book, The Feminine Mystique? Simone de Beauvoir, Gloria Steinem, or Betty Friedan? That would be Betty Friedan. Which TV show featured the character Jeannie, a 2,000-year-old genie? I Dream of Jeannie, The Flying Girl, or Bewitched? And that was I Dream of Jeannie. Who was the lead guitarist of the Jimi Hendrix Experience? Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, or Eric Clapton? The lead guitarist of the Jimi Hendrix Experience was Jimi Hendrix. What 1960s film starred Peter Sellers in multiple roles, including President Merkin Muffley, The Pink Panther, Lolita, or Dr. Strangelove? It was Dr. Strangelove. Who wrote the 1961 book, Stranger in a Strange Land? And Stranger in a Strange Land was written by Robert A. Heinlein. What year did The Brady Bunch first air on television? 1967, 1968, or 1969? The Brady Bunch first aired on television in 1969. Which 1960s TV show was about a magical talking car? My Mother the Car, Herbie the Love Bug, or Speed Racer? The magical talking car was My Mother the Car. Who directed the 1960 film Spartacus? Alfred Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick, or David Lean? The original Spartacus was directed by Stanley Kubrick. What band was formed by former members of the Byrds and Buffalo Springfield? And that band was Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Which book by Sylvia Plath was published in 1963? Ariel, The Bell Jar, or Crossing the Water? And that was The Bell Jar. What is the title of the 1967 film that starred Dustin Hoffman as Benjamin Braddock? The Graduate, Midnight Cowboy, or Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid? That was The Graduate. Who was the voice behind the hit song Respect, released in 1967? The voice behind that song, Respect, was Aretha Franklin. What was the name of the spacecraft that carried the first American astronauts to orbit the Earth? Mercury Redstone, Gemini 3, or Friendship 7? And that was Friendship 7. Who wrote the 1969 novel Slaughterhouse-Five? Was it Kurt Vonnegut? Was it Joseph Heller? Or was it J.D. Salinger? Slaughterhouse-Five was written by Kurt Vonnegut. Which iconic doll was first introduced in 1961? Ken was first introduced in 1961. Who starred in the 1961 film West Side Story as Maria? Natalie Wood, Julie Andrews, or Debbie Reynolds? Maria was played by Natalie Wood. What band was known for the hit Good Vibrations, released in 1966? The Beatles, the Beach Boys, or the Byrds? And that was the Beach Boys. What was the name of the first supersonic passenger jet that had its maiden flight in 1969? And that was the Concorde. Who directed the 1969 film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid? Arthur Penn, Sam Peckinpah, or George Roy Hill? George Roy Hill. Which famous painting was stolen from the Louvre in 1961 and later recovered? The Starry Night, The Persistence of Memory, or the Mona Lisa? And that was the Mona Lisa. Who wrote the novel In Cold Blood, published in 1966? Harper Lee, Truman Capote, or Norman Mailer? In Cold Blood was written by Truman Capote. What animated TV series featuring characters like George and Judy Jetson first aired in 1962? And that was The Jetsons. Which American actress starred in the 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde? Jane Fonda, Natalie Wood, or Faye Dunaway? And that was Faye Dunaway. In which year was the first artificial heart transplant performed? 1969, 1966, or 1963? And it was 1966. Who wrote the play Barefoot in the Park, which premiered in 1963? Neil Simon, Tennessee Williams, or Arthur Miller? Barefoot in the Park, a play written by Neil Simon. Which rock band released the album Are You Experienced in 1967? And that was the Jimi Hendrix Experience. What year did the first episode of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You, air? Was it 1967, 1968, or 1969? And Scooby-Doo first aired in 1969. Ruh-roh! True or false? Mariner 4 was the first spacecraft to fly by Mars in 1965. Is that true, or is that false? And that is true. Who composed the soundtrack for the 1966 film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? And the soundtrack was composed by Ennio Morricone. Which popular musical featuring the song Aquarius premiered on Broadway in 1968? Grease, Hair, or West Side Story? Aquarius was featured in the Broadway musical Hair. In what year did the first episode of Sesame Street air on television? 1965, 1969, or 1967? Sesame Street first aired on television in 1969. Who was the first woman to run the Boston Marathon officially in 1967? Billie Jean King, Wilma Rudolph, or Catherine Switzer? Officially, it was Catherine Switzer. What was the first James Bond film to feature George Lazenby as the lead? Diamonds Are Forever, Thunderball, or On Her Majesty's Secret Service? It was On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Which famous guitarist released the album Electric Ladyland in 1968? Was it Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, or Eric Clapton? And that was released by Jimi Hendrix. In what year did the Stonewall Riots, a pivotal event in the LGBTQ+ rights movement, take place? The year was 1969. In which year did the movie Mary Poppins premiere? 1963, 1964, or 1965? And it premiered in 1964. Who was the first man to successfully sail solo nonstop around the world in 1968? Was it Bernard Montessier, Joshua Slocum, or Robin Knox Johnston? And that was Robin Knox Johnston. Which 1960s British comedy film featured the character Inspector Clouseau? The Italian Job, Dr. Strangelove, or The Pink Panther? The Pink Panther. What was the original name of the rock band The Who? The Detours, The High Numbers, or The Yardbirds? The original name of the band, The Who, was The Detours. And now question 100. What was the name of the first successful human heart transplant recipient in 1967? And his name was Louis Washkansky. Thank you so much for playing Quiz Time. Drop your score in the comments, please. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell so you don't miss Quiz Time when it comes out. And it comes out a lot. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.